I'm here with Anthony Carlin, and we're going to have a little chat through what's been happening to him over the last few months. Quite an extraordinary story. And Anthony, you are a Northern Ireland police officer. You've just come out of prison.
Yes, I have. Yes.
How long were you in prison for?
It was a 3-month sentence, so I had to serve 6 weeks.
6 weeks. And pretty tough for any police officer to be in prison. Very tough for a Northern Ireland police officer to be in prison. How did you find it?
It was definitely a life experience. I never expected for 1 second I'd be serving time ever in prison, and never mind as a serving police officer. Basically, I knew the added thing for me was it was over Easter, which was the anniversary of the Easter Rising.
Right.
So the normal the placid Northern Ireland the sort of peaks and troughs, and that definitely was one of the peaks. 100-year anniversary. So
an emotive time amongst
very much
people
so,
in Northern Ireland.
So, and at that time, then there was a prison officer had been blown up, so the security threat was a lot higher than, or it's always severe, but at that stage there was more chance of something happening.
Right.
So me going into prison over that period was just an added dimension. But going in, I mean, from the minute I walked in, on the very first night when I was there, people were shouting and they knew I was a police officer.
Right.
It was very intimidating.
So hostile, very hostile and
yeah.
intimidating.
Yeah.
And as time went on, did that change?
No, it got worse. It got steadily worse. I mean, there was the first few days when I went in there, there was people shouting and roaring and stuff and coming up to the cell. And then as days went on, it seemed to calm down a bit. And then it got moved upstairs and it just got worse. People coming up to the door banging and saying they were going to, there's 3 things going to happen to you in prison. You're either going to get scalded. They've got those hot, the hot things, the water boilers.
Right.
So literally they just access to them, so someone can fill a cup full of water and just come up and
throw it
in
at
your face, and that's the very real, because people get let out of their cells and they can walk freely amongst the area and they have access to that. So you're either going to get scalded, stabbed, or slashed. And there was one guy had his face slashed while I was in there in one of the other wings. So it's a real thing that happens all the time, and just the fact that everybody knows you're police. You're a hated character from the minute you walk through the doors.
Right. Did anybody show you compassion and sympathy?
Definitely. I mean, the prison guards themselves, they were very respectful to me, and they were, a lot of them asked what I'd done, why I'd done it, and they were very inquisitive. They weren't being nosy, and they didn't have to tell them anything, but they were genuinely interested. Because obviously the reason why I was in there for mortgages and for that type of thing affects absolutely everybody, and that's the crutch of this. So a lot of the prison staff all the prison staff were fantastic with me. There was a few of the prisoners. One of them had a degree in law, and he said he had been following my case and shook my hand and says, "Congratulations, well done, you're a very brave man." And so very. So there's that. Anyone who had any kind of inkling towards what was going on were supportive.
Yeah.
And then you just general population who just didn't know anything about it and just knew I was a police officer and just directed all of their frustration and hate towards me.
And of course, prisons have very, very powerful. Gossip isn't the right word. In the Navy, we used to call it the buzz. The word would go round about what was happening and what was going on and who people were. So the prison buzz system, very powerful. A lot of information gets around very quickly about who's who.
Well, I see from the very first day, someone come out from. I was standing in a group of people going to go over to video link. I was trying to get bail the first week. Right. And this was so I was in my cell, put in at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night, and the next morning at 9 o'clock, I'm going over to the video link. And he's a big monster of a guy with a shaved head, a big scary looking boy, and he came running over and jumped up through the bars and pointed at me and goes, "He's an effing police officer, he's police scum." Right. And I was standing with 6 or 7 individuals who could have turned on me at that stage, So it was just intimidating from the time I went in. And I expected that. I expected that to be the case, Right.
So you spent how long inside?
6 weeks.
6 weeks. And you've only just recently got out.
Yeah. So
when did you actually come out?
April Fool's Day.
April Fool's Day. Yeah, so that was a good day for you. Yeah.
Significant, yeah.
So this is an extraordinary situation. We've got a policeman in prison. So the story that people are now going to want to know is, how on earth did you get into prison? Because this is a very, very interesting case. We just do it a little bit at a time, because there's a lot of information. You've got a lot of evidence to back up what you're going to say. So we'll just keep it in little chunks. This story starts with a mortgage.
Yes. So basically, we took out a mortgage 2008. just filled out all the paperwork, just the normal mortgage the way everybody else does, and over a period of time, you get a 2-year deal. Your mortgage is going to stay at a certain rate for a certain length of time. Then the deal ends, and then you go and get a new deal off your mortgage provider. So we get a letter through the door. Our mortgage came down. We were paying just under £300 a month, which was so much cheaper. It was average rent for a house our size would be £500 or £550 per month.
Yeah.
And we were paying below £300, so it was great.
Right.
But then the deal ended, and then our next payment was over £1,000. So the letter came through the door, says your payment this month's £290. Your next payment's over £1,000, and then it's £800 a month after that.
Right. So for any ordinary family, this is untenable.
Yes.
You can't jump from £300 to those sums of money.
Everybody's in the same position, waiting for that letter.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And did they say why they wanted to make this massive increase?
The deal had ended, and this is what your new payments are.
Right.
End of story. You had no choice in the matter. So I rang the bank. I tried to get, can I not get a new deal, get tied into a new deal, and keep the payments at something that we can reasonably afford. And it was no, it's our internal policy. Your house is a negative equity. And at that stage, it was 2008 crash. Everyone's house was negative equity. So it was like a foregone conclusion. So basically, they said they weren't prepared to give me a new deal, and they just had to basically suck it up. I went to other banks, and they were taking the same attitude.
So what bank was it that you taken the mortgage
Santander.
with? Santander.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Okay. So you try and get other
new
deals.
Deal, nothing was happening. So basically, for a full calendar year, we paid the bank everything they wanted, and it got to the stage where my wife's mum was giving us a fill of oil, for the oil tank. We couldn't afford to heat the house. We couldn't, and for me, it was a scary times for me, because as a police officer, you can't be seen to be getting in any kind of trouble. You don't want to sort of rattle the cage or get yourself in any bother. So I just done everything I've done to pay all the bills I had to pay, but we were struggling to get past.
Right.
I don't smoke, I don't drink. There's no habits, there's no gambling or drugs, or there's nothing. We just are a normal family. Me, my wife, and my 2 kids, and trying to get by in life and try and have some sort of quality of life.
Yeah.
And that was through the floor. We just didn't have a quality of life.
Right. So you obviously you're challenging Santander.
Yeah.
How do you do that? What reaction do you get from them?
Well, basically what happened was I basically decided to pay them a certain amount of money per month, whatever I could afford. Instead, the economy's messed up, and that's, to me, is part of the reason. As the banks have played their role in that, and so the economy is the way it is. I couldn't afford to pay them everything they wanted, so I wasn't saying I didn't owe them the money at that stage. I just gave them what I could afford to pay. So I paid them. I went in and cancelled direct debit. It's called an official offer. I sent them an offer and a cheque, and I paid them every month what I agreed to pay them.
Right, and this is quite a common thing, and it is
that,
within the law that if you can't pay, but you're not saying you won't pay, you offer to make a payment which you can afford.
Yes.
Most companies will generally move towards that, won't they, and say, well, we'll come to some sort of compromise. They obviously didn't.
Santander weren't. Basically, within 6 months of me doing that official offer, I found myself receiving High Court letters saying I was going to go to court for repossession.
Right.
And that was just, that was your worst nightmares come true.
Yeah.
Me being a serving police officer, being taken to High Court, walking this fine line, I wasn't going to hide it from my bosses, and I didn't. I told them what was going on. But, if I lost the house, if I was made bankrupt, would this have an impact on my job? My job is to provide for my family, and that was it, and everything was on the line with this.
Right. Were the letters actually talking about repossession at that stage, or was it just recovery of a debt? It was
repossession.
Repossession.
It was going to room 118 in the Royal Courts of Justice for repossession here.
Right.
And so at that stage, because we couldn't afford a solicitor, I didn't really know what to do. It's just that big. You're just swamped by this enormous beast. Your house is going to be repossessed, and there's also the social stigma of it. It's a stigma. People want to hide behind closed curtains and keep all this stuff. They don't want to openly talk about it, and that's the difference. If people start openly talking about it, there's going to be people are committing suicide because of this. Yeah.
What sort of effect did it have on your family? I can imagine a letter like that coming devastating.
It really is. And again, because I had the added pressure of being in my job, and having to, just that perception of being a police officer, and it was devastating for us to get the letter and figuring, what are you going to do?
Right.
And you either have to just hand in the keys to your house, or else stand and fight for it.
Yeah.
And that's the type of person I am. I don't believe I did anything wrong to be getting that position.
Right. Now, something obviously changed, didn't it? Because you received this letter, the letters, and they're saying basically we're going to have your house back.
Yeah.
That was a frightening event. I think we can use that term. And then you decide you're going to make some sort of stand and you're going to fight for yourself. What triggered you to actually decide to look into this in more detail?
Well, I'm a trained investigator. I was trained by the police to investigate stuff.
Right.
So I just go on, well, why are they taking the house? Is there any kind of chance of me saving it? Is there any circumstances which you can keep your house and renegotiate? Or, basically, is it just a foregone conclusion? Or can you fight this? And so when you go to Citizens Advice Bureau and stuff like that, you're just getting, to me, information that's churned out by the system. It's of there's no real oomph to it.
Yeah.
So basically I started going to meetings down south. At that time, there was nobody in Northern Ireland were helping people with mortgages, apart from Citizens Advice and stuff like that. There was nothing there. So there's a thing called Debt Bus, a group going around the whole of Ireland, and they were giving out all this free information and people about debts, and they were saying all this stuff that to me was just, was ludicrous what they were saying.
Right.
But it was very interesting. They were saying that the banks weren't really lending you money. They were saying, that everything was all this fraudulent activity that people weren't generally seeing, and I was intrigued by it. So I wanted to go down and just listen to what they had to say.
Yeah, so sceptical, but you were prepared to go down and listen to what these people said.
Yes. Yeah. And some of the people were all, fire and brimstone, and the banks are horrible, and let's go. And other people were very, very, very mild.
Yeah.
And one of the people told me about the official offer was someone who was down the middle. He wasn't fire and brimstone. He was just down the middle, and that sat with me. What he was saying was very reasonable in the circumstances, and it sat with me and it sat with the wife, and that's why we went official offer.
Right, but the person who gave you that advice was a lay person who had got knowledge of the banking system. Right,
and there was other people there who had tried the official offer and it had worked.
Right,
and the banks were working with them. And as their situation changed, they were able to pay the bank more money.
Right.
And that, for me, is very reasonable.
Okay, so what did you do? You put a letter together for Santander.
Yes, and basically we went through the official offer process, and it didn't work with Santander. We paid what we said every month on time.
Can we ask how much you paid so that people who've got a mortgage can just see how the figures stacked up?
Well, because my initial plan was, I had other things, the kids needed clothes, we need to put oil in the tank. There's other things needed sorted, things needed repaired around the house. Yeah. So my initial plan was to pay them, I paid them £100 a month.
Right.
That's what because I thought that was reasonable in the circumstances. Right. And some people were paying £500 a month, some people were paying whatever they wanted. And I said I was just going to pay them £100 a month. Right. And then after 3 months, once I get things together, I was going to up that to 2 or 3 or 4.
Right, and that pause, that hiatus, was because they'd clobbered you for these big sums initially, so that had sort of wiped you out.
Very much so.
Right, and so you make this offer of £100.
So
right.
That was, and then say within 6 months of that, then the letters came to say, we're taking you to court. We didn't accept it in any circumstances. Other banks, other people had paid. They were paying £1 a month.
Right.
So some people were paying different amounts. I started off at that amount, but basically it didn't work.
Right.
It didn't work, yeah.
Okay, so what did you do then?
So the letters came, they were going to repossess the house, so the clock was counting down then. I had a specific date to be in court in Belfast, and I had to make a decision what I was doing. So I tried looking, I went to all these meetings, I took everybody's different perspectives into view, and they were all against solicitors. Basically the record of people keeping their houses when they went to a solicitor was pretty much nil.
Yeah, I would not be surprised because while I know there are good people in the legal system, there are many that will work with behind the client's back with the banks or the.
Well, yeah, there's that degree too, but there's an awful lot of very good, very credible solicitors who are trying their best with a broken system, if you want to say
that's
that.
True,
They're trying their best within a broken system, and they can't get your result because there's no results to be had. Yeah. Whereas as a lay litigant, as a lay person, when you go in, you can raise arguments and go places that solicitors can't go because they've got wrapped over the knuckles.
Right.
And that's more the strength in it,
Right, now, I'm going to guess here, but I think probably your training as a police officer would have given you quite a lot of confidence to be in a court and acting as a lay litigant. You were comfortable acting for yourself. Yes.
There's other people would have panic attacks or anxiety walking through the gates of a court. whereas I'd been doing that day and daily.
Yeah.
And it held no fear for me.
Yeah.
And it got, so I was a lot more comfortable. That was a big asset for me, being able to go into a court and not have fear.
So what happened? Presumably then you were starting to delve into the law books yourself to see what the possibilities were, and you're talking to the group and other people from south of the border who'd got some lay knowledge.
Yes.
And where did that little trail take you?
Well, basically it was people. My first question was, what's an affidavit? I didn't know. Police deal with statements.
Right.
And I'd heard the word affidavit before, but I didn't know what form it took. Was there a template? So my knowledge was very, very basic. And basically going to all these meetings, people, whenever you get into this circle, people are so helpful. Nobody's going to charge you a penny. They'll go on Skype and they'll send you documents. They'll give you pen drives with stuff to start you off. Read all this information and literature, and you start build up a knowledge base of where you're at, and here's what the system's saying, here's what's going on, but here's what we've discovered, and here's all these documents, and here's what they prove. And, as a police officer, that's what I done. There's a prosecution and a defence, and you're looking at what the allegations are, and you're trying to get to a conclusion of what you think has actually happened. So it sat with me, this whole investigating the mortgage. Sat with me, and it appealed to my nature as a police officer.
So how long would you say that you spent in this deep research to understand what was going on with your mortgage? We're talking weeks, or we're talking months?
No, well, initially, I've been doing it now, 6 years.
Right.
I've been at it for a long time now, and it's become my bread and butter, and I live and breathe it now.
Okay, but if we just focus in from the time you had the initial letters from the Santander from those initial letters to the point where you'd done enough research that you felt you knew what you were looking at, how long would that be?
I probably had weeks. Basically, what happened was I tried to get information and get help at the start, and was finding very, very little. So I went down over the border to Portlaoise, down in the Republic of Ireland. Went down, met a group of people there, and they were very helpful. There was a group of people that you have to pay like £2,000 to get into a group, and then they freely share all the information.
Right.
And we didn't have that money to give them, and so basically they gave me one free session. Right. To go in, and basically they just, as I said before, they just sort of started me up, wound me up, threw me in the right direction, and set me off. Right. They sent 3 or 4 letters to the bank saying, we had a young child at that stage, how badly they were treating us, the pressure they're putting on us, the whole human aspect of it. Right. Done me a few letters, but it set the tone for how to speak to banks. Right. Not to lie down, not to be subservient. They're trying to come in and steal your house and take it off you, and that you have a load of rights, and you can ask lots and lots of questions, and they have an obligation to answer those questions. So it set the tone for me. Okay. So basically, all I was ever looking for was the next adjournment. So when I went to court the first day, the nerves were the highest. And you can in, and you're going to use these 3 points, which you've researched those 3 points to get your first adjournment. Right.
So if we've now taken the listeners and the viewers into the point that you're starting to go into court. So let's just have a look at that block of how you went through the individual hearings. How did they progress, and what were the key points that you learned as each of those hearings took place?
There's different things going on that you're entitled to be presented with all your papers. When you first go into the first layer of court in room 118 in front of the master, it's basically a rubber stamping exercise. Of the 20 cases that's listed that day, 19 of them are going to be found in favour of the banks automatically. Right. People don't even turn up to defend their property.
This is a bit like council tax in England. A lot of people don't bother to turn up. If they did, the magistrates' court wouldn't function.
That's right. Yeah.
We could have a discussion on that.
We might do, yeah.
Okay.
So I didn't have enough time to prepare the defence, and that was my first. You have an Article 6 right to a fair trial, and I was looking for documents from them, certain documents, certain information, and I had to have a chance to properly put my defence together. Right. And that was basically it. I was getting in with very, very little the first time.
Right. And what was the result from the very first time?
I got an adjournment.
An adjournment.
And so that boosted my confidence.
Right.
And so I wanted to have time to. They submit an affidavit with the bank's allegations of you haven't paid this and haven't done X, Y, and Z. They've lent you X amount of money, and so they want to realise their investment and to take the house off you. Yeah. So you have to go in, and if they've got 25 points on an affidavit, you have to do a responding affidavit and respond to each point and say you don't agree or you do agree. And any points that aren't rebutted stand as a fact in that case.
Right.
So unless you rebut what they're saying, you're saying I don't agree with that, or so I needed time to do an affidavit to rebut their points.
Right. And you were teaching yourself how to put that
teaching
affidavit
myself how
together.
to go, looking at other points, and talking to colleagues and trying to. The first one, as time went on, my affidavits got better, my arguments got better, my knowledge got more intense, and I was able to put the credible stuff together.
Right.
And the advice we got then was to do a subject access request to the bank. Get copies of all the information they have under data protection. You're entitled to get copies of everything that they have. So they, I got things 2.5 inches thick, big grey envelopes full of stuff that sat in the corner for a long time. It's just all this paperwork. You get bogged down with paperwork, and it is very stressful. So the other one is going to the land registry. Go to the land registry. There's one guy in our group who he sent away for all his documents. When they came back, the bank had never bothered to register a charge against his house.
Right.
So basically, end up he got his house for free, which essentially people always say that when you go to court, the judge will say to you, "Sure, didn't you get the money? Do you want to get this house for free?" But the basic problem is that in the scenario that I've now come to know, someone is going to get the house for free. It's either the bank or it's you.
Okay, and we're going to come on to that. So let's, and this of course is a key point, but just stick on this trail through the courts. You buy time initially, you're learning,
yes,
and then you go back into court. Just give us some milestones on successful hearings in the court, or ones where you didn't do so well.
So the first few, I'm learning every time. I'm doing my affidavits. I was against several solicitors from the same firm. And so one person would come and I sort of mopped the floor with a few of them. They came in and they weren't prepared. They were waiting for a rubber stamping process, whereas I started asking them key questions. And they were going, "Oh, I wasn't ready for this, I didn't prepare." So the next day, sort of someone senior to them would come. And eventually it was the managing director of the solicitors firms that came to all the hearings.
Right.
And that's been the one that's been there the whole time. So for the first 4 or 5 hearings, it was, right, we'll adjourn today. You have to get these documents. You have to prepare this. We'll come back in 4 weeks' time.
Right. So you within this series of court cases, you're already starting to drive the other side to do things for you.
Yes.
They've got to find material. They've got to answer your questions.
Yeah.
And as you say, you've put them under enough pressure that they can't use an ordinary solicitor. They've got to use somebody more powerful. You're dealing with a legal company. Did you have any direct contact with Santander, or was it all through their legal?
All through their local solicitors.
Right.
It was them. They sent you all the initial letters. It was their solicitors who were representing them at court. So it was basically just them.
Right.
Yeah.
And just were these in-house Santander legal people, or were
No.
they were using agents? They were using a.
They just outsource it to local solicitors.
Right.
So this firm in Belfast, it's RG Sinclair. They will deal with all the repossessions in Northern Ireland, and so it'll just be regional.
Right.
So I think in England they'll have different people they appoint in different geographical areas to look after all those repossessions.
Okay. Right, so let's carry on through then. So you've asked for material to be provided, and you're putting in an argument, and at some point your argument seems to change from the fact you're trying to agree how much you're going to pay a month to actually starting to look at what the mortgage is itself.
Yes.
So without putting words in your mouth, when did that changeover happen?
Well, the seeds had already been put there whenever I had been to those initial meetings prior to my first hearing. I was hearing all this stuff and I was going, I didn't know whether it was true or not.
This is from the people south of the border?
Yes.
Yeah.
So they started giving me all this information and books and links and downloads, and it's just a constant learning process. And I started to incorporate the stuff that I was happy and that I'd researched. And I'm going, yeah, as a matter of fact, there's an overwhelming amount of evidence there. I'm going to put that in as an argument. And if they deem it to be a relevant argument, it'll stick. And if it doesn't, basically you're throwing a lot of mud at the wall and you're seeing what sticks.
Yeah, okay.
That's all it was.
Right.
So you're trying to be as prickly as you can and slow down the process and drag time out while you learn. So I gave them as much stuff as I could. And a lot of it did sort of stick. But basically, I went through 6 stages of the Master, 6 court appearances.
Right.
And on the 6th or 7th appearance, it was a hearing in front of the Master.
And for an English, if the audience is English or even overseas somewhere, what is the Master in Northern Ireland court system? What would that equate to?
That would be, basically, I would look at it as just being the rubber stamper. He is the lowest level of the court.
Okay.
He's a judge. He's a master of the court, and people go in there. He's the lowest level of the court. It's just the first level. Right. If whoever he finds in favour of that party is able to appeal that decision, then you go into the Chancery Court, and then you go to the Appeal Court. So there's 3. Basically, you have 3 goals. You have 3 levels within the courts, and Master is the first level.
Okay.
And most of the time, it's just a rubber stamping process. People don't object to it.
Right, so 6 sequences, and where does that get you?
That got me into the hearing in front of the Master, where everybody had asked for what they wanted and they received it, and then he was going to listen to all the evidence before him, and when he listened to all the evidence, and then he'll make a decision as to who he's going to award the house to. So I put forward every argument I could possibly think of, stuff I sort of wasn't sure about, but again, it's that whole mud scenario, just chucked it and see what happened, and they denied absolutely everything. One of the things I was most certain about was securitisation, which is basically where banks take 1,000 mortgages, bundle them together, they give it a AAA rating, and they sell it off to an investor. And the investor pays the bank the full amount of the mortgage. And so it's such a high percentage of mortgages that occurs, and the chances of that happening in mine was very, very high.
Right, so people think you've got this very secure relationship with a building society and a bank, and the bank or the building society gives you money and you've got a mortgage running and that's it. But in the background, they actually sell on the whole mortgage.
But it gets worse than that.
Okay.
It just, as you start to scrape past this stuff, you start finding stuff out, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. But basically, banks do that. They sell off the mortgages. And I had looked up and seen evidence that Santander were securitising, and I was happy enough that was a valid argument, but they completely denied that the whole time.
Right.
So eventually the Master in the court that day, I went on for 5 hours, we stood and argued. The Master found against me and gave a possession order to Santander.
Right.
But the one thing that they always do is they offer you a suspended order, so that we're saying we're going to give possession to the bank, but we're not going to enforce it. We're not going to allow them to enforce it. And as long as you pay them what they want every month plus £50 or £60 towards the arrears, then we'll not let them repossess your house.
Right.
But that's, to me, it's a trap, because what happens is if you fail to make a payment, you've breached the court order, but you're in contempt of court.
Right.
And so you're in trouble with the bank, you're in trouble with the court.
Right.
And you're
going to lose.
And you're going to lose. So
right.
I didn't take that offer.
Right.
I just allowed their possession order to stand, and then went and submitted an appeal.
Okay.
And appealed that decision.
Right, so now we're into the next stage.
Yes.
Take us on with that.
And by that stage then, starting to get my feet under the table and start to understand the process. So the next court, the Master's Court's in a private room, small private room, probably the size of this room here. When you go into the other the public court, it's a lot bigger. There's microphones and stuff like that. It's all recorded in front of one of the higher judges. So we went in front of Master Deeney, or Justice Deeney, and one of the things I said was that they had denied securitising my mortgage,
right,
and that was one of the main points. So Santander kept pushing it, and what they said was they would get a solicitor an in-house solicitor from Santander UK PLC to do an affidavit, responding to my points in certain arguments I had raised. They didn't specify.
Okay.
But they said they would do that within, I think, 4 weeks. He gave them an order to do it within 4 weeks. And they didn't do it for 4. So we had the recess from July until September. Right. The court closes.
Just give us a year now.
2013.
It's 2013, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So they didn't do it in that time.
Yeah. So they didn't do the affidavit. So the affidavit was supposed to be done in April 2013, and I didn't get it. Or sorry, July 2013, and I didn't get it until September 2013, which was 4 days before the hearing.
Yeah.
So no time to respond.
Pretty common tactic, isn't it? Delays.
It was, yes.
Yeah.
So when the affidavit came, I read through it, and it was all waffle. It was mostly waffle, but there was a paragraph in the middle, and basically it says, "Oh, by the way, we did securitize your mortgage, but it was only the equitable interest, and only for a small, only between this date and this date."
Right. So that was the chink.
So that was the
it.
chink, and it was so, it was like a small paragraph, and so basically what happened was I had been in front of the master, and the whole time through there and through the hearing, Santander had said in their affidavits and verbally, they argued, Santander have never securitized this man's mortgage, we've never sold it on. And here was another affidavit saying, "Oh, by the way, we have securitized it."
Right.
So I was going, so what you're saying is that you committed perjury in the previous affidavits, and you've told lies orally and perjured yourself in order to steal my home. They use terms that are a lot softer, like repossession, and they use all these bland words that don't make it sound as bad as it is. To me, it's financial.
Theft.
It's financial terrorism. It's an asset grab. The only reason why they're limited in the amount of repossessions they can do is because they can't get enough people into court quick enough.
Right.
The lists are full up,
Okay. So what was the reaction when you pointed out the discrepancy in the affidavits, and you're saying to them this is perjury? What sort of reaction?
Well, what I'm saying is the judge, he tried to sort of skip over it, and I said, no, hold on a second here. I said, I've been coming into this court every day, and it was a very sort of emotional talk. People were saying that it really came from my heart. It really spoke absolute truth. And I was saying, I've been getting in here for all these months. There's me and my wife and my 2 kids, and they're trying to throw us out onto the street and take our family home from us.
Yes.
And they've told lies and committed perjury. I've said from the very start that they've securitized my house. I've knew they did it from the start, but they've denied it. And now all of a sudden they think they can admit they have telling lies, and for us still to continue.
Right.
So they received an order for possession for my house in those circumstances, and so it should be overturned, and I should be given back my house.
This is the maxim at law, isn't it? When fraud's been committed in a case, everything that follows thereafter is fraudulent.
Well, that is a maxim, but that didn't apply in my case because they weren't saying fraud.
Right.
They, again, when the judge gave us his ruling, he said it was a misrepresentation. They tried to sort of muddy the waters and say it was a wee mistake, and we didn't really mean that. But it was nonsense. What happened was Santander knowingly got a very small office with personnel within there that didn't have any expertise or knowledge in securitization, and they had given the original affidavit in relation to my case.
Right.
But Santander know fine well that they've got a securitization department, and there's a solicitor there called Amaya Mazira who signs off on everything, and she's the expert for them. So why did she not give an affidavit?
Right.
And Santander, as a corporation, they can't make mistakes like that. They know fine rightly, and to me it was intentional.
Right. So how did that then go in court? The judge just says it's a mistake. Where did that lead to?
Well, what he said was, when the judge says that they're quite sympathetic to your request, that means they're going to give it to you. I came to understand that, but they said he was sympathetic to the points I had raised, and then he went out. He went out into the basically he adjourned for a period of time, and then he came back and he read out an order, and he basically agreed with me that they had got their possession order under dubious conditions, and that he was going to award the house back to me.
Right. Was that awarding the house back to you still with a mortgage system in place?
I didn't know. I was going, do I have a mortgage anymore? What's happened? What does this mean? There was nothing else. It turned out, I've been told by other people, that was the first time in the United Kingdom that anyone's won in a mortgage case against a bank. Right. Because when I was researching it, I couldn't find anything else. Right. So I didn't know what it meant. As you say, do I still have a mortgage? Yeah. Where do I stand? And all it meant was I was back to where I was at the very start.
Okay. Right, so you'd fended off the repossession.
Yes. So basically. They won the first round, and they got a possession order, and I got that possession order knocked out. So we're back to square one again. Right.
Okay. So let's move on, because this is getting very interesting now.
Yes.
What do they then do?
So they done nothing for a year.
And did you pay any mortgage in that
time?
No,
I got to the stage now. Right, that here's a company here who wouldn't listen to people who are saying, I was genuinely getting it tight for money.
Right.
I said, if I was out smoking and drinking and being, messing about and just not paying my bills, it's a different matter. But I wasn't doing that. They had no sympathy for us, no sympathy for our children. It was very aggressive. They wouldn't take an official offer. They wouldn't work with us in any way.
Right.
And now here they were telling lies and covering stuff up. And I didn't find that acceptable. So the research I'd done to that point was that not only do banks sell your mortgage and get paid in full, but that the terms and conditions of a mortgage are a fraudulent misrepresentation. They actually tell lies. They're full of lies. They say they're going to lend money and they don't.
Right.
And it's very complicated. And
right. Okay. Yeah. Well, if we just take that statement, because there will be some people listening to us talking, and they will have some idea about this point, and others will just say, what does this actually mean? Just explain that for somebody who's no idea about this system of what is the difference between lending money and credit.
Right. So basically what it comes down to is, I mean, the whole thing is intentionally very complicated. People look at it and it's so overwhelming and complicated, they just go, and they don't want to investigate.
They ignore the small print.
They ignore the small print, they know. And the banks, from the day an hour you take out a mortgage, ram it down your throat. If you don't keep up repayments, we're going to repossess your house.
Yes.
It's been normalised. People normalise repossessions that, I messed up, I lost my job, or I got injured, or my circumstances changed, or me and the wife broke up, my circumstances changed, and as a result of that, we lost the house. And people have normalised that. Yes. And that's not normal. You're being set up to fail, because you know if you give 100 people a mortgage in this day and age, 20 of them are going to lose their job and 5 are going to get ill, and there's a percentage market there, and they know that of the 100 mortgages they're going to successfully repossess 50. It's a very lucrative business, and it's set up from that.
So they've had the amount of mortgage that is paid up to the time of repossession, and then they get the house and sell it, so they just make profit on profit.
And then chase you for the shortfall.
Right.
And then if you can't pay the shortfall, they bankrupt you.
Right.
So it's just from start to finish.
Right, so that's the mechanics.
Yes.
What about this business of, is there money that's actually lent?
Right. That to me was like conspiracy theory. People were saying that from the very start, and I just thought that doesn't make sense. I couldn't make the connection. And there is a period of time, and I understand if people think that this is nonsense, but it's absolutely not. So what I found was, I had the bank looking at the terms and conditions for Santander and every other mortgage. They're saying the bank will lend you money.
Yeah.
Right? And there's lender, borrower, money, and there's all these key words throughout the terms and conditions. Right? And so the Bank of England in 2014 submitted, it was their first annual report for the year. Okay? And in that report, they used it as a dummy's guide to what is money. And they had pictures of fish and ham and all this really. Yeah. And it's 30 odd pages long. But they talked about the creation of money. What is money and what constitutes it? And they broke it down into 3 types of money, right? And it's reserves, which is money that the banks have in. Banks can, people's savings.
Yeah.
So there's savings in an account, and banks have reserves. They get them from central banks and stuff, but they can exchange and help each other out with reserves. But they can't lend them reserves out to the public. It's against their generally accepted accounting practices, GAAP. So they can't lend out the reserves.
Yeah.
The other 2 types of money, one is cash and coins. So I think it's 3% of all money that exists is cash and coins, right? And then the third type of money is deposits, okay? And that's the problem. So whenever you take out a mortgage, they can't lend you reserves because it's against the rules. So they don't lend out reserves. The bank don't come to you with a wheelbarrow full of cash and coins. So it's not cash or coins, currency, okay? So the only other one left, according to this Bank of England quarterly report, is deposits. So banks so what they're saying is that whenever you go to a bank, banks do not and cannot lend out money. That the transaction of you making an application and that process creates the money. The money didn't exist prior to that transaction, and it's your signature. And
I'll just interject here, if I may, that of course now with computer systems, this is so easy because you simply have the numbers being typed into a computer.
Yes. So my perception, when I went to take out a loan, and again, you've got a conveyancing solicitor which is supposed to give you legal advice and any pitfalls in the mortgage, and they don't tell you that. So they're negligent from that point of view. So there's a claim there. So what most people think is, if you say, anyone I've ever asked, no one's answered the question. If you take a loan or a mortgage from a bank, and you only fill out all the paperwork and the money goes into your account, where did the money come from? And they all just scratch their head and say, from the bank. It's just like this big facade somewhere inside the mechanics of the bank. They don't understand that. So I'm saying, so I start questioning them on it, and basically people are all the same opinion. When I went to take out a mortgage, I assumed there was some they call it thrifty pensioners, or a rich farmer, or some people who have made a lot of money in life and they've got savings. So they've got some high interest account and that's in there for 20 years, whatever it is. And so the bank can use that money to make their own profit. Right. So they have a big bank account somewhere there with gazillions of pounds in it. When you go for a mortgage, they will take out the money, lend that money to you. They will transfer it from the big Gucci account into your account, your mortgage account, and then the transaction goes through and you buy the house and all that normal stuff happens. So that my perception was that if something physically happened to me, or if I died, or for some reason I didn't pay back that money, the bank will be out the money because they've taken it from this account, and that some farmer or some pensioner is going to lose out if I don't pay it back. That was my perception. But the reality is the money didn't exist. So it's like me, I say to people, if I'm going to say to you, we make some kind of agreement and I'm going to lend you my lawnmower, you've never seen it, but you assume that the lawnmower exists.
Yeah, hopefully.
So hopefully, yeah. So whenever you use the word lend, you have to, if I'm going to lend you the pen, you're assuming that I've got it and I have access to it prior to me making the offer. Right. Otherwise, it's ridiculous. So banks do not and cannot lend money. That's a lie.
But they say they do.
But they say they do.
And
but what they really do is they facilitate credit. And that's entirely different. It's a completely different concept. So what they should be saying is that in the terms and conditions, when you come to us, we're going to make you an offer. When you sign that offer, it does about 4 different things. It gives them permission to put a charge in your house. It creates the money out of thin air. It legally binds you. There's all these different legal aspects to it. But in the moment that you sign that form, you have just created the amount of money that you wanted to borrow.
Right.
And that messes with people's head, and they can't understand. But sure, you get bricks and mortar out of it and everything else, and they can't comprehend that. But that's the absolute truth.
Right.
When you sign, the money's created.
Okay, so you've gone through this initial 6 court hearings. You got to the point where there's a sort of no man's land, and you've now upped the game by starting to throw some very sticky mud. That was your description.
So, yes.
The fact that you're saying, well, actually, Santander, you didn't lend me any money.
Yes.
What's the sequence now in the courts when you take this really heavy
not
argument?
Even that there. I didn't say you didn't lend me money because it sounds ludicrous. And the judges, they always say, well, if you didn't lend you money, then how'd you get the house? Yeah. The guy that you were buying the house from got money, and they start getting tied up. And it's took me a long time of getting it into my head to really understand it, and then to try and simplify it so people just understand it. Right. The banks, they advertise they're going to lend you money, but they know they're going to just facilitate credit and that it didn't exist beforehand. So whenever... Ask me a question again, sorry.
No, that's fine. You are wanting to get into more detail about this business and how the money is created. And I'm just going to say, I think what we do is we just carry on through the sequence of the court cases. Okay. Because we will have other opportunities in the future to talk about this mechanics. It's
such a big subject, and it is very confusing. Right. And so I just want to simplify.
We're here to take people on the journey that you've been through. So we've done the first part of the court case. You take some of these more powerful arguments back into court.
Yes.
Just tell us about what happens when you start to be challenging the bank on more serious issues.
Yes. So during the year, from September 2013 until November 2014, there was no movement. And then Santander sent me a letter saying they're going to take me back to court.
Oh, right. Okay. So suddenly, from a quiet period, they up the ante and say, we're going to have another go.
Going to have another go at me. So by that stage, I had been doing, I had the boost in the arm, the shot in the arm, and the confidence from having won the first case to go in and delve back into it, because I knew they were coming back, so I had to arm myself and find out more information. So at that stage, the level of information I was getting and the people I was speaking to and who were sharing information with me was fantastic. It's really the cream of the crop. It's the best information you can get in relation to mortgages. It's really at the cutting point. The key point of what mortgages are. Right. And I started incorporating all that into my affidavits. So basically, Santander sent out an affidavit. It was from the local solicitor. Again, and he's never met me in his life. He's never seen my mortgage. He's never been to my house. He's swearing in his affidavit that he's had personal dealings in my mortgage. That's just not true. So we, because in my case, what happened was, because of this misrepresentation, this lie that had came to occur, that seems to have been glossed over and the court don't want to get near it or touch it. That affidavit was drawn up by a local solicitor in Belfast. And so as a direct result of my ruling, the banks are now saying, or the courts are now saying that banks have to get a senior person in the bank to do an affidavit for each repossession.
Right.
That's still not happening.
Right.
And if people don't challenge that, it'll just go untouched.
Okay.
But so you have local solicitors swearing stuff that they have no right to swear.
Just stick with your case. So you challenged this affidavit. You're now back in court. Same judge or same level of judge?
It was back in front of the master.
Right.
Again, so it's level 1 again.
Okay.
So at that stage, Ben Gilroy, I think he's been maybe on here before. Ben Gilroy came up and he had observed something. He came out of his own jurisdiction into ours, and he noticed things that we hadn't seen before. And he brought up about a private public place. So the master's room 118 in the Royal Courts of Justice, it says private across the front door.
Right.
And you walk in, it's a small enough office, and there's no recordings in there. There's no anything that goes on in there. The minutes.
It's private.
It's private, and whatever's written down in the book is supposed to be an accurate reflection of what happened. And a lot of times that's not the case. And what I interpret happened isn't what they say happened.
Right.
And so it needs to be recorded. So your Article 6 right to a fair trial is in a public place.
Okay.
So the fact that the courts in Northern Ireland are holding any kind of proceedings in a private place breaches Article 6.
Okay.
You have to set up your business or your place where you work from in a human rights compliant manner. So setting it up that it's a private place isn't human rights compliant.
Right, so you challenge it.
I challenged that.
And what happens?
So I challenged the court. I hand delivered a letter just before Christmas 2013. 2013, I went down with my 2 daughters, handed in this letter, and basically made the Lord Chief Justice aware. If you weren't aware up to this point that you're really badly breaching everybody's human rights in Northern Ireland. So the human rights came in 1998. They were enshrined. So I took the position that every single repossession that had occurred in Room 118, a private place, since 1998 up until I was informing them was either void or voidable.
Right.
The people's human rights had clearly been breached because they weren't told they're entitled to a fair trial in a public place. Right. And in the Royal Courts of Justice in Belfast, there is a master's public court at the very downstairs on the first level up front,
right,
which has microphones and recording facilities.
Right. So
they have a choice to use that room or use the private room.
Right.
And they choose to use the private one when the facility exists.
So you challenged, and what happened?
So basically, I sent them a letter. They had no reply for like 2 months, and then eventually they sent a letter that was full of bland waffle and didn't really say anything. And at the end, it says, "So I hope that resolves everything." And it didn't really say anything. So I sent another letter, and basically they denied and said that they had already corresponded with me, and that was it, done and dusted. They didn't. If I had made a mistake and I had missed something really odd. I'm not legally trained. Yeah. I don't purport to be an expert in this stuff. Right. But this was really simple. It's either private or public, and it can't be both.
Yeah.
And if it's private, it's in breach of the human rights.
Right.
So if I had missed a point, I wanted them to point out, no, this law, this case, this rule allows us to do that. You're mistaken.
Right.
I gave them that opportunity, and they didn't respond. They didn't give me that information.
Right.
So then I went to the Northern Ireland Ombudsman's office. There's a police ombudsman. And then there's an ombudsman for the court service.
Right.
You can only go to them if you've exhausted the complaints process. Okay, so they wouldn't take it on. I went to the Attorney General for Northern Ireland, who prosecuted me, and I made him aware. Are you aware that the court service in Northern Ireland are routinely breaking everybody's human rights? What are you prepared to do? I got a letter back from him saying he wasn't prepared. That's not inside my remit.
Right.
So he passed.
So everybody pulling away from
I went to all the big players, not people I didn't even know of, right, and sent them all hand-delivered letters, and no one took it on. So then I went to the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission, and this was absolutely their job. They're, according to their website, if anyone breaches anybody's human rights, they're going to run through walls and kill dead things to try and protect people's human rights. But when I went in and spoke to them, they came back and says they basically have 3 pillars. They've got their action plan for the next 3 years,
right,
and Article 6 wasn't on that plan,
right,
so they didn't have the resources, and therefore they weren't going to do their job.
Okay.
And I absolutely couldn't believe it. I'm sitting saying that, can you imagine how, if you imagine, say 1,000 mortgages a month or per year, say even 500 a year, and you add up from 1998 until present day, how many thousands, tens of thousands of families have been hoofed out of their house due to avoid unlawful proceedings.
Right.
And they don't think that that's of any concern.
Right, so you get rebuffed by all these people.
Everybody.
What do you do?
No one done their job, and that concluded. That whole process concluded midway through 2014.
Right.
And then my case started. And again, I'm walking this very fine line where I'm a police officer. And I'm,
right, but sorry, the case started, but you had to go back into the private court, did you?
Yes. So my first hearing was in the private court. So what happened was, the day before the court, I walked in. It was a new judge. So the old judge who'd, the original master who'd found against me, he had retired, Master Ellison, and Master Hardstaff was now in place. So I walked into the court on day one, and on the day before I was up in court, and I walked in there just as a spectator. So I walked in, there's like 6 people walked in, it was people that I knew, but it was their court case and I had nothing to do with it. And I went and sat in one of the seats at the back. And the judge was like, whoa, who are all these people, you know? And everybody named who they were and what they were doing. They all should have been there. And then he said to me, who are you? And I says, oh, my name's Anthony, I'm just in here to observe. And he says, get out of this court, you know, there's a session on here. So I asked him 3 times, can you tell me if that's a private or a public place? And he wouldn't, he just waffled, he wouldn't answer. So on the 3rd time he said to me, look, this is, you know, there's a hearing on place here, just get out. So after 3 times, I've never been disrespectful in the courts. When he told me out the 3rd time, I walked out the door. So the next morning I returned for my case, shirt and tie and briefcase and all my stuff with me. Well, he went in, he sort of looked at me and he recognised me. We sat down and he says, right, hello, Mr. Carlin, and we all introduced each other. And when the female solicitor started to speak, she was the one who told the lies in my case. So I says, look, I object to her speaking here. She has committed perjury and told lies in my case last year. I says, but further than that, I says, I object to these proceedings today. No, what I first asked him was, I says, Master, I came in here yesterday and I asked you 3 times, was it private or public, and you wouldn't answer. I says, so now that my proceedings are in front of you, I don't want to continue until you answer that question. It's a reasonable question. So can you tell me, is this a public or a private place? And he hemmed and had and waffled, and he wouldn't answer. And it's such a simple question, but it's a public place, but it's private for your convenience. And
waffle.
So I says, look, Master, you know, I came in here yesterday as a member of the public, and I was turned away. So it's not a public place because it's not open to the public. I says, and it says private in big letters outside your door. So I says, so this is a private place. Well, yes, it is private, but it's just for your convenience. And I says, well then, I says, I don't consent to these proceedings continuing because it's a breach of my Article 6 right to a fair trial in a public place.
Right, wow.
And there was just silence. And after about 10 seconds, I says, Master, would you like to respond to that? And he deflected it to the solicitor. And he was like, so she hemmed and had and says, well, Master, I've never heard this argument before, but this is the only mechanism we have to repossess people's houses. So I suggest we just continue.
Oh, that's an interesting. Never mind the law.
Yeah, never mind the law. Let's just hurry on and let's skip to the good bit. So I looked at her and I said, so are you telling me that my human rights, that basically my human rights don't exist here, or that you're wanting to repossess my house outweighs my rights? And the judge goes, oh, good point, Mr. Carlin. He writes it down. And he asked me, are there any other points? And I says, res judicata, which is double jeopardy. I says, they had a go at me last year. They've got unlimited resources. And they basically fell on their faces. They told lies. They tripped themselves up. And res judicata, I would say, I don't really think it did apply in reflection, but I had a good go at it. So I says, I don't believe they should have another go at me. And he goes, oh, very good point, Mr. Carlin. So he actually made an order that day that my case was to be moved up to the higher court. One was because it was a private place, and the second one was res judicata, which they've now determined doesn't apply in my case because they didn't have a full trial, you know.
Oh, okay.
But they accepted on that day that it was a private place, and for that reason they bumped up to the public court.
Right.
So subsequently, every argument I've raised, they've said, oh, if anybody wants to appeal their cases, they can. So he said that to me in the most recent case. So they're saying that anybody in Northern Ireland who's had a repossession since at least 1998, there was other equality laws and stuff in place before that, and that can be investigated, but certainly from 1998 onwards, if you've had a repossession here in room 118 in the Royal Courts of Justice, you can appeal that decision.
Right, that's a fantastic bit of information.
Everybody, and that's such a such a huge public interest.
Right. You go up to the higher court.
Yes. So,
and how many months later is that?
So what happened was that was he adjourned that for say 4 weeks.
Right. Okay.
So during that time, the private public place, I argued that I went off, and I went through. There was another case in Northern Ireland. It was Bank of Scotland versus Ray and McGreedy, and that was about capitalisation, which is whereas banks were adding interest onto interest and double dipping. It's very technical. Right. But basically, they charge you money every month and then they add it onto the interest. And they can't do that. So I was looking for it's called capitalisation. The Attorney General for Northern Ireland, he took it very seriously. Took the very unusual step of going in over the top of the judges. Right. And saying that Bank of Scotland, he alleged they committed crimes by doing this. Yep. And basically he was looking for an investigation. And that was in capitalisation. So I thought, there's another bit of mud for me to throw. Yeah. I'll look through all my paperwork and see, does capitalisation apply in my case? So I was looking through the 2.5-inch thick subject access request, looking for information about capitalisation, interest payments and stuff. And I came across a document called a listings document. And this, as a police officer, a lot of stuff I was saying, I didn't have any concrete evidence, documentary evidence to absolutely prove what I was saying. A lot of it was just a lot of research, legal papers and stuff. There's a lot of good evidence there, but it wasn't concrete evidence. Yeah. So I was looking through these documents, and I came across a document called a listings document, and it looks exactly like a statement. It's all the same payments as a statement, but for every payment, it's got a 3-digit code, 3 letters, LLP or CRF or whatever, and at the back there's a ledger at the back that gives you what all these codes mean. So it's all the payments and what they were was an interest payment or a back date or whatever it was. So on page 1 of that, I'll just go back. When I won the case in 2013, Santander admitted that they had securitized my mortgage. Yes. And that they had sold it between 2 specific dates.
Correct, yeah.
Okay? They had sold it and bought it back or whatever way they done, but it was 2 specific dates. So when I went to this listings document, I was going down looking for interest rate, and I looked, and in the column where my balance of my mortgage, it was £192,000. And mine isn't a repayment mortgage, it was just a interest only. So my balance stayed the same the whole way. And at the bottom of the page, the balance was 0. And I looked beside it, and there was a payment into my mortgage account for £192,000. And I looked, and I couldn't, and then I flicked over to the next page, and the same day, the payment for £192,000 disappeared out of the account. So, I mean, if I accidentally paid £200 into your account by accident, I couldn't retrieve it without your permission or knowledge. Yeah. So somebody had done a mysterious payment into my account, and it disappeared the same day. So it was very, very questionable. I couldn't believe what it was. But the balance of my mortgage was 0. Yeah. And if your bill's paid, your bill's paid. Someone pays your dinner bill. Doesn't matter who pays it. Yeah. Once it's paid, it's paid. Yeah. So here was this payment for £192,000. And when I looked at the dates, the date of that was the exact same date that they had said that they securitized my mortgage. Right. So then I thought they said they securitized it from this date to another date. So I went through this looking for the second date. And on the second date, when they securitized my mortgage, there was a second payment of £192,000 coming into my account. Right. And the same day it disappeared. So my mortgage balance was zeroed out on 2 occasions. Right. So,
and am I right in saying that the money coming in is the sale of your mortgage?
Yes.
Right.
The full amount. So what that showed me was that Santander, I had known from the start from my research that securitization involves banks selling all rights to your mortgage to an investor. Right. And HSBC was caught selling, taking investment money from the guerrilla FARC, the Colombian drug people. Right. It was money laundering. Right. So one of the investors was criminal gangs, and so that happened. So that, some investor has given £192,000 cash to Santander. Right. And paid them in cash. So if they've been paid, why is Santander taking me to court to repossess my house?
That's a very good question, and I just want to add here. I hope it's going to be well, it's clarification for me, but for other people watching and listening. The other organisation has bought your mortgage.
Yes.
and paid 192,000 for
Yes.
it. Right. What do they get? What is it that they get when they buy it?
They get
Because you come back at me on this one, because I'm making sure I understand fully here. Your payments will be in the future to Santander.
yes.
So Santander's had the value of the mortgage paid back, and it's going to continue to take the money from you.
Yes.
What does this special purpose vehicle get financially when they have paid for your mortgage?
Right. So again, I'm taking it from a suspicious point of view. As a police officer, you're always
Well, I think
suspicious
that's
of
a
stuff.
good place.
And
yeah.
it is, and it's a healthy way to
Yeah.
be. If you're proved wrong, then that's
Yeah.
fine, you know.
Yeah.
But so what happens is, say you've got an investor who's got some kind of dodgy background. It might
Right.
be a bona fide investor, but basically what you want to do is you want to take the amount of money you're investing and give it to somebody.
Right.
Right, so you're investing that money, and over a period of time, you get a credit stream, so you get payments back every month.
Right.
So if that was dirty money, you're getting rid of dirty money and you're receiving clean money back.
Right.
Or as an investor, you're given an investment amount of money and you're
Yeah.
getting more money back.
Right. Okay. So would it be that Santander Bank would be passing a monthly amount of credit back on that sum?
What happens is there's about 20 documents called a mortgage sale agreement. And what happens is, unbeknownst to the homeowners, the banks sit down with these investors and they basically draw up a big, say it's 20 different agreements. There's a servicing agreement, which is that the bank, in my case Santander, will agree to run the account as per normal, as if they still own the loan, not say anything to the homeowner. And what happens is Santander now take the money from the homeowner and they give it to the investor every month. That's the
Right.
role that they play, and they take a percentage of servicing fee every month. So
Right.
they take a percentage just for costs.
Right.
So they've already been paid in full, and now they're just a servicing agent. But for all purposes, you don't understand that. You still go to your bank every month. You still pay the same bank every month, and you don't know anything about that.
Yeah.
They've never disclosed that. There's something in the terms and conditions where they try and get off with that, but they need your permission. They need your permission to actually sell off your mortgage, and they don't ever ask for it.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So you've now got armed with this pretty heavyweight material, and you presumably use it in court.
Yes.
And what happens?
So what happened was I found this listings document, right? And not long before that, I had came across the Bank of England quarterly report, which clearly states from the highest authority in the United Kingdom, a central bank, that banks don't lend money.
Right.
And that implied then that all of the terms and conditions are fraudulent. It's just a lie. It's a honey trap. Here's all these terms and conditions to get people to come in to sign the document.
Right.
And then that's you nailed. Once you sign it, you're nailed. So not only did Santander not lend me money, but then they've sold my mortgage to some other unknown person and been paid at least twice. And then we also know that they take out insurance policies, and that if your account, if you go into arrears of 90 days or more, that they get paid the full amount of the loan again. So your bank can be paid up to 3, 4, 5 times the full amount of the mortgage,
Right. Now,
having lent you nothing.
yeah.
It's just fraud upon fraud upon fraud. There's people in America who have, they get into arrears and they're going to get repossessed, and they've got repossession letters from 3 separate banks, all wanting to repossess the same house.
Right. And you're starting now to get into toxic debt, I think is the correct term. This is what a lot of the banks have collapsed over.
Yeah.
Right. We can't go much further into that because we've got to stay on your case.
Yes.
Right. So let's get into the next round in the courts, and where we want to get to is where you really take a judge to task.
Right. So what happened was, on the very first hearing, I went in and again, we were struggling. Most people are struggling in these days of austerity and the prices. We were just struggling to get past. But Maxine, my wife, she got a coupon deal to go and stay in a hotel, some hotel in Belfast. We went down, and when I went in to lodge all the papers, it was £150 or something, and that was basically me. That was me out. So I had to pay the last of my money. It was very important for us to try and keep our family home, but it has a real effect on us and our quality of life. So I paid them the money to submit this application to strike out Santander's case.
Right.
And the basis of that was The Bank of England are saying that they didn't lend me money in the first place, and that they've basically told lies to induce me into this financial arrangement.
Right.
They should have been telling me from the start that it was their facilitating credit. They were creating money out of thin air using my signature. It has to be transparent and clear, and that wasn't clear. It wasn't said to me. So, but not only did they not lend me money, but they've sold it twice. And
you had the proof.
Yes.
In this case, you had from those documents.
So I had concrete evidence. And so what happens is, in the rules of court in Northern Ireland, the Supreme Court rules, it states that unless a debt is expressly admitted, the plaintiff must prove it. So I was denying I owed them money. So Santander therefore had to prove that there was a debt. And they were using the charge over the house as proof. And I'm saying, no, that's not proof. The only proof is if you transferred, if there was £192,000 came into my mortgage account, which I used to pay off the house and purchase the house, where did that come from? Where was the originating source? If you moved it from this big Gucci account with all the money in it to my account, then we could print off our statements, print off my mortgage account and your big Gucci account, and it would show a payment of 192 grand coming from your account into mine. Yeah. And if you produce that, I'll pay us everything you want. That's proof for me you did lend me money. And then what I'm talking is nonsense. Yeah. And that's all I was looking for. But you must prove the debt. And the only way to do that is to show where the accounts, where the money originated from. Yeah. My argument isn't that I received 192 grand. I did. But they didn't tell me. They duped me into that. And they duped me into, they basically put the money up front and I'm paying it off for 30 years. But it was all through me. They didn't do anything except provide a service.
Yes.
And that's like going to get your shoes fixed at some stall in the local shopping centre. You pay him for his time. Right. You pay them a fee, and that's all the banks do. They provide a service.
Okay,
they don't lend you money.
What was the judgment then when you put those arguments forward?
So what happened was I went into court. On that occasion, John Hirst was over, and he stood as my Mackenzie friend. And I basically put it to the judge in the rules of the court that at any time in proceedings, if there was basically they could kick out the case. Yeah. They could bin the case if there was evidence to show that there was fraud or any kind of untoward dealings, and I had listed them all. So I spent 6 weeks doing an affidavit, and it was 111 pages long and 42 paragraphs, and it was the cream of all the information I could get from the smartest and cleverest people I've been involved with across the UK, all the really hard hitting, cutting edge arguments in relation to mortgages. It's as deep in as you can go. It's right at the heart of it, and my affidavit covered all of that. And so when I put in the affidavit, the judge basically asked him to strike the case out there and then. It paid me money, and everything else was wanting to kill. You want to kill dead things, but it does. It's very emotional. But in 4 years of being in court, I've been nothing but respectful to the judges the whole time. Yes. If they found against me, I took it in the chin and just went and appealed. But as times went on, I've seen double standards in the court where. I know a man who's lost £1 million farm in Northern Ireland, and the solicitors argued res judicata. My own case and other cases I'm aware of, when homeowners tried to argue res judicata, the judges kicked it out. So there's definitely double standards there. Right. And then there's another individual over in England here who has direct proof that a judge said, if I let this man win his case, then the entire mortgage market will collapse overnight. Yeah, and that's right. and we've got audio of that, where that's been excluded from the record. So there's an absolute, judges cannot let, there's my case and there's dozens like it around the country. Yeah. And if I was to win, or anybody else was to win our case on these points, the mortgage market would collapse overnight. Because it is fraudulent. Because it's fraudulent. Everything about it is fraudulent. Once the first person proves that mortgages in their current state are completely unlawful and fraudulent, the entire system will fall apart. Right. And it will. And, but the economy collapsed in 2008 because of fraudulent dealings and criminal nature of bankers. So, it collapsed then, and it wasn't the end of the world. So I would rather the banking system collapse in its current form due to people being treated right and this fraud coming to an end, rather than the decision of the judge. Decision of the judge. On that occasion, he says natural justice should prevail, and they have to have a chance to respond. So he adjourned it until September. Right. So I'm going to keep pushing you. Then so in September, we got the date to go into court. My mortgage was in amongst the rest of the pack. Are we talking September last year now? September, yes. 2015.
2015, right.
So it was adjourned from July 2015 to September 2015. It was listed on the Chancery Court. I turned up into the Chancery, which is the next level up from the Master. When I went into the court, I was sitting there for ages. Santander hadn't turned up. And eventually I caught the eye of the clerk, and she called me over and says, "Your case has been moved downstairs." And I couldn't understand, but I knew it was late. And I thought, this is some kind of tactic for them. But what happened was, I'd put in 6 applications for committal, to put in jail the CEO of Santander, the barristers, everybody who had dealings with my case, who had committed perjury, who had told lies, and I had evidence of that. You know, I wasn't taking this lightly. They tried to do all this stuff and take the house off me.
It was just a mistake.
It wasn't. It was absolute fraud, and I had proof of it.
Yep.
You know, and the fact that they had lost the case and had it overturned and couldn't appeal it was proof it was perjury.
And I'm also going to remind our audience that, of course, you are a serving police officer, so you are trained to be looking at evidence and criminal activity, and you were seeing it. And
I was seeing it, and I was certain that what I was talking about, you know, I could prove my case.
Yeah.
So I put in 6 applications for committal, for everything from Nathan Bostock, the CEO of Santander, right down the whole line to the solicitor in Belfast who told the actual lie. So I put in those applications, and for some reason my case was cherry picked by the second highest judge in Northern Ireland out of Chancery and took down to Queen's Bench, and mine was the only case, and no other cases that day.
So you're late, you go down.
I go down in, and we basically go in, and I asked, why has my case been moved? Oh, there was congestion. The girl seemed very fidgety and awkward. And she was under pressure. Basically, she just waffled and said there was congestion, and they'd picked my case and took it down. And then let's move on. So then we came in. The judge came out, and I spoke I knew my stuff inside out. I knew my affidavit. And basically, I stood up and I spoke for an hour and a half. And the judge, I didn't get speaking for 30 seconds. And the judge went, what was that there? How long? Back up a wee minute. Explain this to me and explain that. And as I went through, I had my flow ready. When you're going up to speak, you're all prepared and your papers ready. And every time I tried to speak, he interrupted me. He stopped me from speaking. He took me back and forth. And at the end up, I had this big bundle of papers. And then he was asking me questions, and I was lifting this down and lifting this up. And he just bamboozled me. He's not in the position that he's in for no reason. He's very good at what he does, and he just turned me around in circles. And at the end of it, I think I actually spoke for like 3 hours that day, and my head was it was the most mentally drained I've ever been in my life.
Because you had to concentrate the whole time.
I had to concentrate the whole time. There was all the pressure of losing. If I lose here, I can lose my house. There's all that pressure you're under the whole time. So I gave him every time he asked me a question about the creation of money, I was able to answer it because I know it inside out. And he's leaning back in his chair, and he was going, so you telling me you didn't even get any money, and this just appeared he was being very sarcastic. It just appeared out of nowhere. But sure, how did you get the house, and how? And what I'm trying to say is, right, if you don't understand the mechanics of modern banking, you're sitting there in a position, you're going to award possession of someone's house, their livelihood, where they brought up their children, the whole human factor. You're going to give someone's property to a bank and throw them out onto the street, and you don't even know about the mechanics of modern banking. So you're either involved with them or you're incompetent.
Right.
And that's not that particular judge, that's every judge. How can they make a ruling if they don't understand the basic concept of mechanics of modern banking?
Right.
And
so this judge gives you the runaround.
He gave me the absolute runaround, and come towards the end of it, say I was mentally drained. He was asking me questions, and I says, look, I need a break here for 10 minutes. So he recessed for 10 minutes. And during that, I realised that basically I was out of petrol. I couldn't manage anymore. So we struggled to get an adjournment. We wanted to push for one. So when we came back in, he says, I have another appointment to go to and whatever. So we basically got it over the line, and we survived that day. So we adjourned it for 5 or 6 days. And during that time, I then became aware of the Banker's Book of Evidence. Right, so remember I said the rules of the court says that unless a debt's expressly admitted, the plaintiff has to approve it. So that's the rules of the court. So the judge was ignoring the rules of the court. I was asking, first and foremost, it was a reasonable request. If I take you to court and say, Brian, you owe me 20 grand, and you're going, who is this bozo? Can he even prove I owe money? I don't owe money. That's a basic concept. Yeah. So I'm saying, can you please prove you owe me money? I owe you money. And the bank wouldn't do it. And he wouldn't tell him to do it. So I come back the next day with the Banker's Book of Evidence Act 1879. Section 4 says that anyone in proceedings in a high court, if basically any debt is queried, the bank must produce, a judge may order the bank to produce the books within 72 hours. So I'm saying, I'm putting you on your oath here that I'm saying they didn't lend me money. This is all a fraud. And the only way to get to the bottom of this is for them to produce the books. If they produce the books and it shows that I owe them 192 grand, I will stop proceedings. I'll not go any further and I'll pay them back everything they owe. Do you understand? Yeah. And that's very fair. But if they produce those documents, it will either prove me to be an idiot or for them to be criminals. Yeah. It's one or the other. But either way, it finishes this case. Right? Rule 1 of the rules of court says that everything has to be done expeditiously to try and minimise the amount of time in court. So rule 1 of the courts backs me up here as well. That this can cut away all the red tape and the nonsense and get to the crux of the matter. So he was ignoring the rules of the court. He was ignoring common sense and a reasonable request. So then it hit him with the Banker's Book of Evidence that says the 72 hours. And he says, that's irrelevant. You have to apply under the rules of the court for disclosure. So the Banker's Book of Evidence applies across the entire United Kingdom, right? But the rules of the court in Northern Ireland only apply there. So he was dismissing primary legislation in favour of secondary legislation. Yeah. So basically, my hand, I had a stronger hand than he did. But he dismissed that. So then on day 2, I basically sent him an email prior to day 2, telling them off, saying, when I tried to speak, you interrupted me. You took me back. Yeah,
because the judge's role is to hear the evidence from both sides, keeping it simple, isn't it? And then he's going to make a judgment on the evidence presented in court.
I presented all my evidence to the judge. He's supposed to listen, and if the plaintiff wants to object or say, no, I don't agree with that or anything else, he can raise his arguments. Yes, but it's not for a judge to knock back my arguments.
The judge is directing his own court.
Very much so. And it was very, very unfair. It was apparent to everybody there it was very unfair. So I sent him an email, saying that basically, on day 1, you kept cutting me off, interrupting me train of thought. I wasn't able to present my case in the manner. And they had said to me that on day 2, I was only getting 1 hour. And that was it, because this was a nonsense. And they had to move on. So in the email I said, if you don't have time to deal with my case, then recuse yourself and give me a judge who does have the time, because I'm entitled to a fair trial and I'm going to exercise that right. So the next day when I came in, he was very sheepish. He's very respectful. He allowed me to speak and he was very calm, and it was a different scenario on day 2. But basically he didn't have time to deal with it. And he says, Mr. Carlin, how long do you need the next day? And I was like, as long as I need, as long as I want to take. I wasn't being disrespectful, but I didn't want to be rushed or to be rushed. It's called a rush to justice. Yeah. So he says, look, how long do you think you'll need to say what you want to say? And I says 3 hours. And he says, right, we'll adjourn it for day 3. So what I said to him then, so on day 2, I put the argument to him about the Banker's Book of Evidence, and he rebutted it. So I went off and done my homework and came back, and there's the Banker's Book of Evidence. I don't want to get too much into it. I like to keep things simple, but there's 3 bits of legislation. Banker's Book of Evidence and the 1879, the Interpretation Act 1960 in Northern Ireland. And basically, it says that judges can't ignore legislation. And it's primary legislation. So the first one says, if I'm looking for the books, the judge may instruct the bank to produce them. The second one is that he can't ignore primary legislation. Yep. There's 2 of them. And the third one was from John Hurst, ex parte livesay. Julius versus the Bishop of Oxford, a stated case argued to the House of Lords that says may means must. That if there's a positive obligation, if there's somebody going to benefit from a judge, from legislation, if it says a judge may do it, it means must. So those 3 together, I called it the Holy Trinity. And I says that compelled the judge, and I still say that. And they're trying to take a different position on it, but it does. This everything points to you telling them to produce the books. And if they produce the books, either I'm an idiot or they're a criminal. Right. So and it gets to the heart of the matter.
Yeah. So you've put those very powerful cards on the table.
Yes.
What's the judge do?
He says anything else. So during those 3 days of the hearing, I put forward at least 15 arguments. The fact that it's the owner of a registered charge who can take you to court. So when I went to the land registry and found the charge for my house, it says Abbey National on it. And if you go to Company's House, Abbey National is it's no longer
In
exists,
existence, yeah.
right? So then a company that doesn't exist can't take me to court. So it's Santander taking me to court, but their names, is not on the charge. So
Right.
therefore, they're not the legal holder of it. They're not the registered owner of a charge. So they're in breach of the land registry rules.
Right.
So I broke out the land registry rules and showed the rules that they're broken.
Right.
So I had like 15 competent, reasonable, lawful reasons why they couldn't repossess my house.
Yeah.
And so he adjourned, and I was just, because of the quality and calibre of the evidence I put before him and this reasonable request backed up by legislation and the rules of the court,
Yeah.
I put him in a corner where he either had to find in favour for me or he was breaking the law. If his job as a judge is to administer law and administer legislation.
Yeah.
And if he ignores that, it's my opinion that he is committing misconduct in public office. If he's not doing his job
Right.
and applying the law as it stands, then he's committing, I'm entitled to justice, not in later hearings. I'm entitled to justice today in this hearing,
Yeah.
and I've paid me £150 to get justice. So if I can get justice today, you always hear about hearings collapsing on a certain day. Evidence comes to light and the hearing collapses. And that's what I was going for. So I was entitled to justice that day, and he couldn't delay justice.
Right.
Justice delayed is justice denied. So basically, he adjourned it to make his decision, and that took 3 months. Normally, it takes 2 or 3 weeks. So this took an extraordinary amount of time.
So he was off getting some serious advice.
I don't know, and that's the position
I
we
would
took.
guess.
The longer it took, the more we think we've given them a lot of problems. And it was a 42-page affidavit. There was loads and loads of information in there. And then on the day when it became a reserved judgment after 3 months, the Lord Chief Justice gets personally involved. He emails the judge and says, "What's going on here? How long is this going to take?" So I basically get a letter 3 months and a week. I received a letter saying the case was up on the 12th of January
Right.
this year to get for him to hand down judgment on my strikeout application. So Santander were trying to take my house for the second time, and I provided all this evidence that they had breached every rule in the book, didn't lend me money, and had been paid twice. And I wanted evidence that they'd lent me money, and if they couldn't provide that evidence, you must strike a case out. Right. Until they can produce it. So I was 99.9% sure I was going to win. The only way I was going to lose was if I had made, he could point out something simple. And I would go, "Oh, I never thought on that." And I'm not saying that I wouldn't make a small mistake or any kind of mistake. But whenever I went into court that day, from early on, halfway through his reading of the document, he made it quite clear that I was losing. He found against me that all my arguments were idiotic. And these are taken from other stated cases where other judges had found. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. So he was trying to say it was all idiotic and ill-conceived, and he made a ruling about this nonsense about the creation of money. And he just basically slammed on the whole thing. And it's not that I have any ego and I was annoyed at him or anything else. I had put him in a position where he was getting so close to breaking the law, he had to be careful. And he blatantly found against me. And so I allowed him, he finished handing down judgment, and then at the end, he was awarding costs to the other side. And so the Fraud Act, fraud by abuse of position. If you have a position of power and you use that to cause one party a gain and another party a loss, that's fraud by abuse of position. Right. Fraud by suppression of documents. If you have a document which would prove someone else's innocence, and you knowingly, in a financial matter, you hide that, it's fraud by suppression of evidence. Right. So there was evidence that would prove my innocence, that he could easily tell the bank, produce this man saying he doesn't owe money, bring in proof, and it's the burden of proof's on them. He could easily have done that, but he negated to do his job. Right. And over the last 4 years, I've seen so many dubious, it's a foregone conclusion. The bank is going to win. All over the world for decades, no one has ever beat a bank in open court when it comes to mortgages and proving that they were unlawful. Right. All it takes is one person. So no one's ever won. It's a judicial guarantee for the banks. And I put him in a very tough position, and he didn't do his job. And as a police officer, I went in there to that court as a civilian. I never identified myself as a police officer. They asked me what work I'd done, and I told them what I'd done for a living. And I also said that I was the code of ethics. I have a tighter road to walk than the normal person, because I'm governed by the code of ethics in the police, and I have to watch me knitting more so than the average person. So they knew what I'd done, but apart from that, I never brought it up. In the whole 4 years I was in court, I never was disrespectful to a judge. I never, I asked him questions. I asked him, important questions, and I stood my ground when I needed to. I was never disrespectful. I was never rude. I never stepped out of line.
Right.
On that occasion, I was certain. For a police officer to arrest someone, they have to reasonably suspect. And just to make it simple, if I came into this room and you were holding your head and there was blood, and you said someone came out of that room there and hit you in the head with something, he was wearing a red jumper. If I went in and there's somebody in there with a red jumper, I could reasonably suspect it was him, because he's in the right time in the right place. But I don't know he's done it. That's reasonable suspicion, as opposed to I'm sitting here and I observe him coming out and doing it.
Right.
I no longer reasonably suspect, I observed it happening. So I didn't reasonably suspect that the judge had committed a crime. I observed it happening. I observed him ignoring evidence, ignoring reasonable. It came down to they either have to prove they have a case or not. If they can't prove it, then proceedings stop today, and I'm entitled to justice. So I observed him, and I still believe he's committed a crime. So as he was given awarding costs to the other side, I put my stuff away, and I knew what I was doing, and I made a decision. I believed he had committed a crime, and judges aren't above the law.
No.
There's Judge Constance Bristow. She was arrested in London basically for 3 points on a driving licence, so some perverting the course of justice, but judges can and are arrested. So at that point, I believe he stepped outside of his capacity as a judge. He had abandoned his judicial oath, and it was the offence that he had committed was so serious for me, and he was in the middle of committing the offence. He was awarding costs, so there was preventing crime too. But I stood up and I held out my warrant card, identified myself as a serving police officer in PSNI, and I told him that I was now placing him under arrest for 5 separate offences.
Right.
And so I was never going to put hands on him. I knew he had security guards. I knew the position that I was in. So I wasn't violent. I kept professional the whole time. I raised my warrant card up, I identified myself as a police officer, and started making my way towards him. Security staff came and stood between me and him, chest to chest. If a police officer is carrying out an arrest, they're able to use a reasonable amount of force in order to effect that arrest. So I could have pushed this boy out of the road, but I didn't, because he was just doing his job. And what I was doing was highly unusual. I didn't expect him to grasp it.
Right.
So so basically he wouldn't let me past. So I just turned and walked an alternate route up and stood beside where the judge was at. So there's a wee swingy gate, and I stood there. And I said to him, "You're now under arrest for misconduct public office, malfeasance, Section 4 of the Fraud Act, Section 3 of the Fraud Act, and aiding and abetting the theft of my home." And so I gave him his Article 3 caution, read him his rights. And it was while I was speaking, he was trying to speak over me. So I just raised my voice enough that it could be heard. I remained calm and remained professional the whole time. So at that point then, whenever I read him his rights, he then jumped up and he ran out of the court and shut the door into the judicial corridor. The whole thing was surreal at that point, I'm sitting there and I knew myself I'd crossed the line, in the fact that it was, I'd just been coming to court the whole time, but I knew and still believe that he committed a crime. And by him running off, he was evading capture. So what happens is, if anybody carries out an arrest, a police officer carries out an arrest, once that person's arrested, they're taken to the nearest custody suite. That's what happens with everybody in the land. That's what PACE dictates. PACE doesn't say everybody except the judge, right? But it was special circumstances, and I understood that. So, my intention was, I am arresting him. I'm not going to be hands-on. I had no handcuffs with me. I had no weapons or any kind of... But all it was I'm now arresting you. If we have to get into your security car and drive on to your custody, I go into the custody suite with you and I present my case to the custody sergeant.
Yeah.
She has to weigh up all the allegations I'm making. A solicitor or legal representative can make representations for the detained person, who was a judge. And the custody sergeant at that point can say either is or is not a lawful arrest, and she will either grant, she will detain the person to be interviewed, or else she will dismiss them. But it's the custody sergeant who makes that decision. That happens in every arrest across the United Kingdom. The only time that can change is if the police officer themselves can street bail the person. Listen, you're still under arrest, but I'm going to make an appointment for you next week because we're so busy, and I know who you are, and I can verify all your. And you make an appointment and give them a piece of paper.
Right.
Okay. So you can bail them, or you can, if you think, oh, you know what? As a matter of fact, I don't believe you've committed a crime now. I'm going to de-arrest you, mistaken identity or whatever. Yeah. So you can de-arrest, you can street bail, but mostly in arrest you go straight to custody. So when I arrested him, the only person that can tell me that it's not a lawful arrest is the custody sergeant. No one else can, not even the chief constable, can tell me to de-arrest. No one else can tell me what to do. Obviously, if someone tried to perceive that I had lost my marbles, or I was, in some way emotional or something else, and it wasn't. Yeah. It was black and white. He committed a crime, and I was calm throughout. Yeah. So what happened was, police were called. I asked someone to call police to assist me. Police came within 15 minutes. They arrived. I explained to two very nice constables what I'd done, why I arrested him, the legislation, the whole ins and outs. And they basically, it was over. They didn't understand it because they didn't have knowledge of civil matters. But he says, what you're saying is very logical, but I can't stand over anything you've said because I don't have any awareness. So within another 10 minutes, two sergeants arrived. They'd been speaking to people out in the corridor. They came in and basically said to me, right, listen, what's happened? And I spoke for like 10 seconds. And then they said, look, come on outside and speak. And I said, look, I've asked someone to call you to assist me with my arrest. And the judge is behind that door there. And they says, no, let's go outside. And they kept trying to get me outside. And when I refused, then they said, right, well, that's it, you're under arrest. And they arrested me for this alleged technical assault against staff. I never put my hands on anybody. Right. So basically at that point they arrested me. And then I was taken from there over into the custody suite. I was detained for an entire day. Halfway through the day I was summoned from the police station over to the courts, where the judge who I had just arrested came out and says that I would commit contempt of court, wow. Contempt in the face of the court. And I stood up and I says, I object to you holding these proceedings, because he was under arrest. And basically he was getting special treatment. Yes. Anybody else across the United Kingdom, when they're arrested, they're supposed to yield and go, right, okay, you're a constable, and honour that and go with the person. And if I was a raving loony, if I was barking up the wrong tree, was irrelevant. That was to present it to the custody sergeant. Yeah. No other police officer can make a determination on that, but the police in that occasion did. They made a determination that it was that, we're not listening to your arrest, we're not listening to you.
They're listening to the judge.
He's higher up the food chain than you were listening to him. Right. And that was the decision they made on the ground. And to me, it's the wrong decision.
So what happened from that court case? Did the judge stay in court, or?
So basically, he handed me a piece of paper outlining contempt of court. That without the important part was that without lawful excuse, I did X, Y, and Z. I stood up, I wouldn't sit down, I spoke over the judge, I approached him, blah, blah, blah. But they were saying this was all without lawful excuse. A police officer carrying out an arrest is a lawful excuse. And I had a lawful reason to do it. And I wasn't doing it with any intention to disrupt the court. If I wanted to disrupt the court, I would have done it while he was reading out I gave him time. He read the whole hearing. He read the whole order. And when he finished, at that point when he finished, then I spoke up. Right. So, there's no intention for me to disrupt the court or anything else. I was a police officer. I'm there to prevent and detect crime. At that moment, I believed a crime had occurred. So I therefore brought myself on duty as a police officer, identified myself as such, and carried out a lawful arrest. Right.
So you get a piece of paper, and
he hands me a piece of paper outlining stuff, outlining these allegations against me, and then I was took back out into the cells, and then took back around to the police station. Right. Spent the rest of the day in the police station. I was interviewed by the police ombudsman.
Which is unusual.
Which is very unusual. So the police should have interviewed me first, and then referred the matter to the ombudsman. But the police didn't interview me. So the ombudsman came in, they interviewed me, and then they bailed me for 30 days. Right. The police then put my name, address, all my details, and the fact that I was a police officer in the public domain, and clearly identified myself. And the threat in Northern Ireland is severe. and they put me and my family in danger. But that wasn't of any concern to them. I say then 2 weeks later, then a police officer was blown up, or a prison officer that was blown up because the threat was so high. And they had ignored that for the previous 2 weeks, and then whenever that man had the bomb under his car, then all of a sudden the press were bigging up the threat in Northern Ireland and how severe it was and how awful it was. But 2 weeks before, they didn't care about me and my family.
Yeah.
So the whole thing, a bit of a whirlwind, to be honest. But basically, there was, over that period, they had arrested me for having done my job.
Yes.
So what happened was to reaffirm to them visually that they had arrested a police officer for having done his job. I took in a briefcase with me down in the court on the very first hearing, and I went into the toilets and I changed into my uniform and put on my hat, and I walked up into the dock as a police officer because that's why they arrested me.
Right.
And then so what happened was there was 2 police officers, one either side of me, and then me in the middle.
Yeah.
So when the judge came out, he looked and he seen 3 police officers, and he was looking for Mr. Carlin.
Yeah.
Then I stood up. But it was just to visually reaffirm to them, I just done my job. Instead of preventing and detect crime, and I was arrested because of that.
Right.
So any arguments I put forward, I believe, and I've took the position, and I believe I'm correct. If I've arrested a judge, the judge that I arrested is on the Privy Council, okay?
Yeah.
So's the Lord Chief Justice. So there's a conflict of interest there. Plus, they're all in the same job. They're all, they all go to each other's parties and whatever else. I'm not saying that they can't be professional and do their job and separate and not. But to me, I don't believe I can get a fair hearing from any judge in Northern Ireland,
right,
or across the water.
Just for completeness, how did you actually then end up in prison? Sorry, you okay?
Sorry. So what happened was the hearing was held. I asked for a jury trial on day one, and I was denied that, and I kept asking for one. I said, I can't possibly get a fair trial by the judiciary because I arrested one of the judiciary. They have a separation of powers, and justice has to be done, has to seem to be done. So I wanted a jury trial. I called upon all my constitutional rights in the UK. Everything was ignored, and they told me they were going to convene what's called a divisional court, which is 2 judges. So they convened this court, and they referred the matter to the Attorney General for Northern Ireland to give the appearance of some kind of fairness. And to me, it wasn't. It was just, the whole thing was just any arguments I put forward. It was just a tsunami coming at me, and there's no arguments I put forward. Preconceived judgment before I knew, and I named it before I went in, that I was going to be convicted and I was going to be put in jail. It was just a matter of how much time I got. I basically went against the system, and I had to be made an example of, and they didn't make an example of me.
And you got six weeks.
So on the 17th of February, they sentenced me, they found me guilty. So it was to the criminal burden of proof, which is beyond reasonable doubt. That beyond reasonable doubt, I had went to court that day with the intention of arresting the judge.
Right.
And that's like saying, if you go to a nightclub, you don't go there, you go there anticipating what may or may not happen, and you've done your research and you know where you stand. But I can't have done anything without the actions of another person. What he done, and I still believe the whole mortgage market is rigged.
Yeah.
And no one has ever won on a court.
No.
And the evidence I put forward was so strong and so obvious.
But they had to close you down.
That they can't let me win. And there's another case in the United Kingdom where the judge just says, I can't let him win or the mortgage market collapse. I hit that wall, and they had to fight against me.
Well, Anthony, so the last bit of this is that you're now going to be put in front of some police disciplinary board.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
What do you expect to happen then?
Again, a foregone conclusion. I'm just getting tsunami after tsunami of just crap coming towards me. I fully believe that the police are going to dismiss me,
right?
And that I have no defence that I can put forward. Again, for the whole appeal process, the basis of me losing my job is the fact that I was convicted in court.
Yeah.
And I can't, I was convicted in court. I'm saying I was wrongly convicted. The human rights were breached, my constitutional rights, the whole thing, any evidence.
And that was all done to protect the banks?
Yes.
Yeah.
All done to protect the banks.
Okay. Anthony, I'm going to say thank you very much for taking us through that. Of course, for the millions of people out there who've got mortgages, what this really means is that this massive banking fraud affects millions of families. It doesn't matter what colour you are, what religion, what country you're in a lot of cases, that the criminal activity is there. And as we've now heard from Anthony, is being protected by the very judges and judicial system that should be preventing criminal activity. So I'm going to say thank you very much for standing up for what was right. And it's going to be very interesting to see how the public reacts to the fact that the lid is really off the banking conspiracy.